If you have any question, you can type that. Okay. Good evening, everyone. The topic for today's discussion is romantic essays, and we shall be focusing primarily on the works of Charles Lamb, a renowned essayist. And the works of Charles Lamb, we have selected an essay called In Praise of the Chimney Sweepers as a text for our close reading. Essay as a form developed along with the rise of the novel. And as we know that the rise of the novel is related to so many social, political, situational conditions of that age. So in the early 17th century, we have this development of the prose as a form of literature with the development of the printing technologies, as well as the rise of the middle class, the bourgeoisie, the expansion of literacy, the habit of reading that developed during that period among the middle class, the performance of the stories and small essays, the development of the periodical press, the development of circulating libraries that could circulate good amount of literary text among the readers, the habit of reading the text aloud to the audience, and the use of a prosaic language much more closer to the people. So here we have the development of a prose that takes us back to the 17th century. Gradually, we find that essay developed as a particular form. Although even before 17th century, we have some essays that came under the impact of the French prose forms, the European prose forms, such as Monte's essay. The Elizabethan or the Jacobean writers also preferred this prose form to write some texts. Although these texts gradually came very close to the Romance tradition and also provided the source for the development of the form called romance that gradually became a form called prose romance and later on developed as a novel. First, it developed as a picaresque novel, and then gradually it developed into various forms of prose. While novel is a fictional prose work, essay, on the other hand, is a non-fictional prose work, where the writer has some fictional narration of actual events in a formal style. This periodical press also gave the writers to contribute certain essays on ecclesiastical subjects. Because of its brevity of form, like the short story, essay can also include so many topics, various types of subject matter, and can be related to the contemporary socio-political, economic, cultural situation of the age. So in the early 18th century, we see that this form of writing, especially in the neoclassical period, that is also called the age of prose and reason. We find the development of essay as a style, as a form of writing. You must have heard the name of great English essayists like Addison and Steele composing some of the brilliant essays written in the neoclassical prose style, full of inane phraseology, gaudy language, stylistic features, and an elevated prose that is used in the writing. This type of writing became very popular with the development of periodical press and the periodicals, journals, magazines during the neoclassical period. Major prose writers of this period also include writers like Alexander Pope, writers like Dr. Johnson, and through their writings, we find that prose became a very popular genre among the readers during that period. Along with this, we have seen that in the 16th century, also in the 17th century, there was a development of literary criticism. And literary criticism in its earlier phase also took the form of essay. Although we have a few exceptions, like Dryden's work, essay on dramatic poesy, where we have the invented characters discussing among themselves. And while they are discussing on drama, they are also using the drama as a form. But apart from this particular essay, most of the essays are written in the prose form. We also have some literary essays written in the poetic form. So I'll say essay in criticism or essay on man by Alexander Pope. But nevertheless, most of the literary works, such as Johnson's preface to Shakespeare, these are written in prose style, neoclassical prose. The neoclassical prose style was thoroughly rejected during the Romantic period. And during the Romantic period, we have a different form of prose style. And we can say that this type of prose developed under the impact of the new type of reasoning, new type of ideological views that developed during that period, that is reflected also in the style of writing. As because Romanticism has often been called synonymous to a renaissance of wonder, a return to nature, a kind of subjective expression of the self, self-conscious fullness and representation of the romantic ideals, return back to the medieval period, situating the content closer to man in a language really used by man. So we have in this Romantic period development of romantic essays that are distinctively different from that of the neoclassical period. But because of the continuity of the form, because of the continuity of the content from the neoclassical period, early 18th century period to the late 18th century period and early 19th century period, we find that prose essays contain some of the elements of the past. Although the sharp satirical witticism that we find in the works of Addison, Steele, Pope, they go missing somehow in the works of the Romantic prose writers. Here we have more closeness to the anxieties and aspirations of the common people in the Romantic period. As because prose is brought much closer to the people, even poetry was brought much closer to the people, as Wordsworth has stated that his objective was to write in a language really used by men, to choose incidents and situations from real life, and to use a language that is prosaic or at least familiar to the audience. In case of romantic essay also, we find the same kind of preponderance of a style that has more human quality, more naturalness, more spontaneity, more emotional exuberance, and a kind of representation of the contemporary life as it is. Yet romantic essays also contain a distinctive prose style. While poetry was becoming prosaic during that period, prose was becoming poetic during the Romantic period. That is one of the most interesting facts of the development of romantic essays. I repeat, while poetry was becoming more prosaic in language, in diction, common vocabulary of ordinary conversation was being incorporated in the field of poetry, the language of prose was gradually becoming more and more poetic during this period. That is distinctively different from the works of the earlier essayists. So this marks the development of romantic prose. Among the romantic prose writers, you must have heard the names of famous romantic essayists like Charles Lamb, William Hazlitt, Thomas De Quincey, Leigh Hunt, William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Most of the names are familiar to you. Dorothy Wordsworth, excellent prose writers of that age. So today I will take you through a short historical discourse on the growth and development of romantic essay that developed during this period. And for this, I will be talking more about the historical, social, political background that gradually shaped the development of this new form of writing. And we have in this period the development of periodicals that were published periodically during that period. And in Britain, since the beginning of the printing press in the 15th century, gradually the development became more widespread, and the cost of production of a printed text became much more cheaper during this period. So it was against this background of legal, cultural, political changes that we find that new type of communication technology also evolved and contributed a lot to the development of newspapers, magazines, journals, reviews, and the Romantics were first to identify that the periodical press could therefore flourish and help them to develop their own writing skill, writing literary works or creativity. These changes are necessary for the development of any genre. During this period, as you remember, that drama is on decline, while the prose is on rise. Poetry, we do not have readers as much as we had in the neoclassical period. The elitism that was tagged to poetry go missing somehow, and this was very conducive to the development of essay as a form. So the adoption of the vernacular, means local common day-to-day colloquial language, became more popular rather than the ornamental language of the neoclassical age and the Latinate language that English is very much suitable for expression. So we have a new development of language, a new prose style developed and became one of the vehicle of expression. And with this expansion of education, the participation of the communal literary culture, this is very important, communal literary culture. That means people sitting together, discussing, writing, reading. So this communal literary culture that developed during that period, and literary writings became public both for performance and for readership. So this cultural change shaped the emergence of new kind of essay during this period, especially among the educated public. Throughout the 18th century, newspapers, magazines, reviews, and a steady stream of pamphlets, even encyclopedias, started offering in a very condensed form information, arguments that were otherwise unavailable to the common reading public. So instead of spending much on purchasing expensive study materials, these essays provided resources for the readers, and they could easily access these essays. So this led to the rise of the periodical press during that period, and that also was supported by the Licensing Act of 1695. So publishing revolution took place during that period, and with the publishing revolution, we find that number of books were available for purchasing, borrowing from the lending libraries, and everywhere we find that especially the reading class of England started entertaining the development of prose writings. So from 1750 to 1800, we find a steady basis on which the prose writing became functionally available to the readers. And the best symptom that shaped the proliferation of periodical can be seen in the new emerging print culture and the book trade. So we must always think about the sociology of publishing while analyzing any kind of development of genre. In the field of the socio-political changes also, we have the influence of the Licensing Act, and with the expansion of the technology, we have the new periodicals that became circulated during that time. So in 1814, we find that the Times newspaper finally installed a steam press. The Times, that is the name of the newspaper, that installed a steam press that was capable of meeting any demand that the reading public might ask for. And this also led to the development in the printing press, and the production time, the production cost, all became quite under the control of the publishers. because of the speed and the extent of transportation of the reading material among the people, we find that essay became a very popular form during that period. The 18th century had been a period of systematic road building. Transportation developed because of the road building. And by the Romantic period, that we usually say early 19th century, say from 1798 onwards, we find that the press and the circulation of the printed material became accessible to the common people. Physical developments like these always have played an important role in developing any kind of literary forms and in enabling to some extent the way the writers communicate with the authors. So we should take into account the development of the periodical press and the journals, magazines of that period. This periodical press had evolved to meet a kind of new demand for information and for critical understanding of the developments that were taking place. You remember that this period was also a period of expansive colonization. So this press form, the printing press or the essay form, developed and provided an outlet for the development of the essay. Just take, for example, the case of India. India was a colony during that period. Calcutta was the center. Even in Calcutta, we find that around 1790s, several local journals, local magazines, local newspapers gradually developed. And by early 19th century, so many journals were there, like Bengal Gazette, available to the public, Calcutta Gazette, available to the public. So in England also, it became very popular. And with the presence of so many periodicals, journals, magazines, newspapers, the English public got some material for self-instruction, for self-expression, and amusement. Among the newspapers, we have several examples. And how will we define a newspaper? Newspaper was first of all defined as something that contained daily or weekly information regarding the events, especially the important events, and carrying the most recent political, commercial, social information relevant to the life of the community it serviced. So by 1800, just imagine, there were well over 250 more of them featuring the foreign domestic news. So well over 250 newspapers circulating in the Anglophonic world around London. So there were well over 250 or more of them featuring the foreign and domestic news. Previously, it was the exclusive domain of the elite class. So this type of development of the newspapers and journals provided some type of scope for the writers as well as the readers to exchange views and commentaries. By 1800, the press had become the formidable presence that we recognize nowadays. Nowadays, media has taken several forms, but during that time, the only form of mass communication and media communication was in the form of newspapers and journals. With the political and cultural consciousness of the nation, we find that the 1790s saw the involvement of the political class, of the social class, and common Londoners who got involved in the explosion of information that was coming from the colonies. So we can say that the sales, even advertisement came during that period. And with this sociology of production, the development of the newspapers and journals, we find that the number of contributors also increased during that period. Newspapers do not usually feature literary histories. Okay, they do not feature in literary histories, but they must be taken into account at least to take a note of the essays that were published during that period. And the review and literary magazines that developed during that period also contributed a lot to the development of essay as a form. It is also worth remarking that the cultural community between the world of daily and weekly journalism, say the world of the letters, if only because the romantic tendency was to communicate with the audience, gradually developed. So this cultural community, the communication between the reader and the author, gradually shaped the development of both the personal essays and the impersonal essays. Many writers and thinkers also took up this form of essay writing and involved themselves in daily and weekly journalism and provided political commentaries. You remember the works like Edmund Burke's Reflections on the Revolution in France, or say even Tom Paine's Rights of Man. All these were serially published and later on published in the book form. Samuel Taylor Coleridge used to boast that the political essays he contributed over 25-year period is such vast that it should be taken into consideration. We have radicals during that period contributing a lot to the circulation, even the production of materials for the literary form. So there is an element of truth in this confirmation that is made by Coleridge, that essay became one of the most dominant forms of writing during that period. So we have short-lived periodicals during that period, like The Watchman, 1795, or The Friend, that circulated from 1809 to 1810, where we have important writers emerging as essayists. The newspaper also provided some scope for the publication of essays, especially reflective essays, descriptive essays, political essays, and cultural commentaries during that period. So by 1817, we find that when the Times had a wide circulation, we find that it became more independent, more effectual, and the sales of the Times newspaper was around 14,000 in 1820. So you find the popularity of this type of literary writing. Besides relying on the network of correspondence, say letters are published in the newspapers, so correspondence became also an integral part of such publication. So there were also reporters all around the world, Anglophonic world, the colonial world, contributing a lot to the publication of the essays. So Edinburgh Review also published several essays of these writers. So political journalists like Leigh Hunt, William Cobbett, they contribute some interesting essays. Even literary critics, especially theater critics, also contributed to independent weekly called The Examiner. The Examiner was founded in 1808. So by Leigh Hunt. Leigh Hunt was an important essayist of that period, a literary critic and essayist of that period. So this periodical, The Examiner, was also gradually allowing some essays written by the radical writers. Although the main editor of this essay, Leigh Hunt, was not a radical Democrat, was neither a Republican, but still he infused the political writings, and there was a kind of philosophical spirit in the contributions, in the essays that were published in this journal, The Examiner, that was founded in 1808. Sometimes we find that reform, government policies, practices, even contemporary corruption that was prevalent during that period also became a part of such publication. So along with his brother, the Hunt brothers, they soon started publishing some of the radical works and diverting their attention. So 1812, we find that there is a censorship and Prince Regent who was in control. You remember that around 1812, Jane Austen is also contributing to the literary world. 1813, Pride and Prejudice. So prose was very popular during that period. So during that period, Prince Regent also regarded this essay that became very popular as a violator of word, a kind of expression that is radical. So any kind of writing was permissible before that. And gradually we have a kind of control by the state, control by the government, especially with the Examiner also underwent some changes. Gradually, because of this suppression, because of this censorship, became less politically aggressive. And Hunt himself turned to poetry and criticism rather than political journalism and contributed more familiar essays. So we find that magazines that developed during that period also had the scope for the publication of essays. So one Sunday newspaper that was published during that period also contained information related to the domestic politics, domestic economics, and the development of theatre. Whatever was there, including the original poetry, literary criticism, all these were also included in the work. And the political intelligence, even the polemic side, so multifaceted opinions, they also got some scope, some presence in these works. So this is in short the development of the journal during that period. One of a long standing journal, the Gentleman's Magazine, continued its publishing. Gentleman's Magazine of Edward Carve continued publishing from 1731, and this magazine survived till 1914, 1914, and it called itself a monthly collection to treasure up as in a magazine. So magazine also became very popular. A variety of subject, variety of essays became a part of such magazines and journals. The essence of magazine was never to be long, never to be dull upon one subject, rather to introduce the readers to various forms of subject. So Gentleman's Magazine offered the stimulant of true life, even crime stories were present in that journal, magazine, with commentary on the subjects of social life and of various kind of information that came into the popular domain. So magazine also developed as a source of informing the readers about social conduct, about cultural conduct. For example, magazine like Ladies' Diary that started publishing from 1704, continued up to 1840, contained articles on history, on geography, even mathematics, along with more predictable gossip that became very popular during that period. The magazine market in the late 18th century and early 19th century became a prolific market with so many magazines, as I have stated, more than 250 magazine, newspapers, journals that developed during this period. So we have Blackwood's Edinburgh magazine that was published from 1817 to 1980, yes, 1980. Or the London magazine that came into print in the year 1820. It was a short-lived one, continued up to only 1829. The New Monthly magazine that started from 1821 under the editorship of poet Thomas Campbell, a famous poet of that age. So all these magazines, even a short MAGA, MAGA, came into existence during that period. This MAGA later on developed into the London magazine. So it was gradually becoming more controversial magazine. This was becoming gradually more controversial with the presence of so many types of essays written even by the political stalwarts of the period. So a number of contemporary thinkers, polemic writers, polemicists started contributing to the London magazine. John Scott was generous in his recognition of the precedent set by MAGA, and therefore he shaped London Magazine to provide important information and introduce contemporary controversial topics. You remember the essay, very famous essay, De Quincey's Confession of an English Opium Eater, as we are the students of Rishi Bankim Chandra College, and we know that Rishi Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay also composed his essays based on such opium addiction. So entire Kamalakanta Daptar and the essays that are related to that were influenced by De Quincey. Even in India, the writers were contributing a lot to the development of the essay as a form. Along with this, we also find the development of review magazines, say Edinburgh Review or the Quarterly Review that came into being during this period. 1756, there was the publication of the Critical Review, and this Critical Review, edited and managed by the novelist Tobias Smollett, you must have heard the name of Tobias Smollett, became very popular and continued publishing, and even it faced some challenges because of the new copyright laws that came into force during that period. The Tory party, you know, we have the Whigs and the Tory, two political parties in England. So Tory party also supported Critical Review and established the work as a political journal where the essays are published. Even the Whigs, the Whig party, they brought out their monthly review, setting a pattern for the early 19th century where the Whig Edinburgh Review of 1802 could be followed by Tory's Quarterly Review that was published in 1809. So we find that two political parties, they are patronizing two political magazines, and these review magazines contain political views. So these two big reviews became very popular during that period. Changes to reviewing practices introduced by the Edinburgh Review enabled reviews to become a discursive force. And throughout the 19th century, we find that controversial political discussions were an integral part of such essays. So this is again a form where we can have political essays that develop. Political essays are also non-fictional prose essays. The Edinburgh Review, on the other hand, published only quarterly with a determination to be distinguished rather than further selection. A number of articles were published. Even these magazines paid well to the contributors. Nowadays, if you contribute a writing to the journals, contemporary journals, or even newspapers, you hardly get any amount. But during that period, because this was the only medium of mass communication, the writers, the authors were paid much better than contemporary writers. So under the Edinburgh editorship of Francis Jeffrey, from 1803 to 1829, we find that the book reviews gradually expanded. Another form that developed during that period was called periodical essays. And we know that periodical essays also provided a solid foundation for the publication of the essays. The periodical essays, the periodical itself, also provided some scope for the publication of materials drawn from various ways. So periodical essays provided platform mainly for the publication of informal essays. So periodical essay, that takes it coinage from the word essay, attempts or suggests with some kind of authority the authorship as well as the subject, and communicates that to the readers. That means you are familiar with the writer, you know the subjectivity of the writer, and you also are familiar with the topic of discussion of the subject, and therefore the readers can identify the subject with reference to the authorship. This is also related to the cultural practices, literary cultural practices of the age. So I will just try to define what a periodical essay is, and then I will gradually move on to Charles Lamb's famous publication called Essays of Elia. So familiar essays, essayists of that age, I just refer to their names: William Hazlitt, Charles Lamb, Leigh Hunt, Wilson, Thomas De Quincey. So they started, as I said earlier, their career as a political journalists, reviewers, and then started developing the use of personality and personal experience as interpretative. For the sake of clarity, we can discriminate these writings from other essays that were published during that period. So romantic essays, romantic periodical essays, contain some identifiable characteristics, and we can distinguish that type of essay, the romantic personal essay, from other essays. For example, the political essays can be defined as short rhetorical argumentative piece concerned to record the influence or the immediate events, the conditions, say Coleridge or say William Pitt or even Edmund Burke contributing a writing. So we know about these writers, their political views, say the political views of William Godwin or Thomas Paine that got published. So this political essay was a distinctive form of essay where we have the writer communicating with the audience the political views. So we have another form of essay that was published in the periodicals that was called occasional or familiar essay. So this occasional and familiar essay can be defined as licensed musing. It means go as you like, write as you like. Licensed musings on miscellaneous aspects of social or individual behavior. Say, for example, Charles Lamb, what is he writing about? He is writing about his school days. Tagore also wrote about his childhood days. Even Lal Bihari Dey wrote about his school days. So this type of essay. So any kind of licensed musing on different aspects of social or individual behavior even of the married people. Hazlitt can even write on boxing, on the Indian jugglers, or even on the silly issues they can write. They can even write on murder, murder considered as one of the fine arts, very famous essay by Thomas De Quincey. So he wrote an essay called On Murder, considered as one of the fine arts. So these type of essays can be called occasional or familiar essays. Essays of Elia fall under this group of occasional or familiar essays. Apart from this, there is also third form of essay that became a part of periodical essay that contained historical cultural review. Here we have, in this type of essay, a sustained historical interpretation of contemporary culture. So cultural record can be best found in the essays that were produced during that period that fall under the category of historical cultural periodical essays. So in this type of essays, we find a kind of intervention of the writer, intervention in the cultural realm domain. So we also have philosophical interpretation, even reactions or analysis of contemporary historical events. Say French Revolution has just taken place. You remember in the year 1789. So writers are commenting on that. Some reflections on the French Revolution by Edmund Burke. So this type of essay also provided the scope to comment on the contemporary events. Even the changes in the literary culture that can be published. So we have so many writers publishing on these issues. Say Charles Lamb writing on the artificial comedy of the last generation. It's a literary essays, but also published as an informal type of communication with the audience, like the essays that are published in the periodical essay journals. So later on in the Victorian period, the same tendency continued. So in such familiar essay, we have reflections on Waterloo. You remember Waterloo, Battle of Waterloo? Even reflections on the Peterloo massacre, where the Luddites, the farmers, were killed by the state. So we have such reflections. In the earlier period, we had Spectator, Edison's Spectator. tradition and steel. They talked about the contemporary culture through these essays, through their essays. And the same we find in the essays published in the Romantic period, a continuity of the neoclassical taste regarding fashion, regarding manners. The exploitation of personality cult also gradually developed with this essay writing. Essay became more self-conscious, more confessional, and the Romantic essay inherited extensively from the French forms that developed, especially the essays of Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Remember, Rousseau also wrote a long narrative, Confessions. Even the novelists like Lawrence Sterne influenced the writers. Charles Lamb, writes his famous essay called Confessions of a Drunkard. See how interesting the essay might be. Essay is Confessions of a Drunkard. Thomas de Quincey writes his famous essay, you remember, Confessions of an English Opium Eater, series of essays. William Hazlitt launches into meditation, and he wrote an essay called On Living to Oneself, with a characteristically disarming intimacy, and recalls nothing so much as the conversation poems of Coleridge. So these essayists are conversing with themselves, with the audience, in an informal manner, and there is a certain amount of familiarity, a kind of communication between the audience and the readers. And on the basis of this familiarity, we find the development of new type of prose style. When we will read Charles Lamb's essays, we will find how the prose style gradually developed. And so I will be sharing with you the essay that we are going for a close reading. And as because this will be our first reading today, we will first focus on the prose style that became very important during this period. So can you see the screen? Yeah, please respond.
Yes, sir.
Okay. In Praise of Chimney Sweepers. So whatever discussion we make, we just will try to see whether the periodical essay form, the familiar essay form, allows the scope of the writers to contribute with the readers. The topic here is chimney sweepers. It was a practice during that period of employing children, small children, as chimney sweepers. And as you have read in William Blake's famous poem, London, the chimney sweepers were employed even by the church, by the landed gentry, rich people, and they were forced to sweep the dust, the soot that accumulated in the chimneys. So narrow tunnels of the chimneys allowed these small boys or girls to pass through the tunnel and clean the tunnel, the pipes of the chimneys. So Charles Lamb is writing on the subject chimney sweepers, and we'll find that how he is presenting the story of a chimney sweeper, how touchingly, with emotional attachment to the subject, he is presenting this essay. The essay will be presenting to us not only the personality of Charles Lamb as a writer, as a person, as a human being, as a romantic, but also the subject, that is the chimney sweeper, more vividly than any other writing can present. So first is the use of the subject, I. So I, first person, this I, first person, appears in this kind of narrative. So I like to meet a sweep. Understand me, not a grown sweeper. Shall we go for a reading? Can you read the text? Yes. If you can read the text, we can go for a reading of the text.
Yes, sir.
So do you want to read the text with me or analysis of the text? So it is better, let us first go for a reading of the text. Yeah, paragraph wise,
yes,
if you want to participate, you can also participate. So introductory paragraph, I like to meet a sweep, understand me, not a grown sweeper. Old chimney sweepers are by no means attractive, but one of those tender novices, blooming through their first negritude, the maternal washing not quite effaced from the cheek, such as come forth with the dawn, or somewhat earlier, with their little professional notes sounding like the peep, 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 peep of a young sparrow, or liker to the matin lark, should I pronounce them, in their aerial accent, not seldom anticipating the sunrise. I have a kindly yearning towards these dim specks, poor blots, innocent blackness. I reverence these young Africans of our own growth, these almost clergy imps who sport their cloth without presumption, and from the little pulpits, the top of the chimneys, in the nipping air of a December morning, preach a lesson of patience to mankind. When a child, what a mysterious pleasure it was to witness their operation, to see a chit no bigger than oneself enter, one knew not by what process, into what seemed the forces Averni inferno to pursue him in imagination, as he went sounding on through so many dark, stifling caverns, horrid shades, to shudder with the idea that now surely he must be lost forever, to revive at hearing his feeble shout of discovered delight, and then, oh fullness of delight, running out of doors to come just in time to see the sable phenomenon emerge in safety, the brandishing weapon of his art, victorious like some flag waved over a conquered citadel. I seem to remember having been told that a bad sweep was once left in a stack with his brush to indicate which way the wind blew. It was an awful spectacle, certainly, not much unlike the old stage direction in Macbeth, where the apparition of a child crowned with a tree in the hand rises. Readers, are you listening? If thou meetest one of these small gentry in thy early rambles, it is good to give them a penny. It is better if you give them twopence, if it be starving weather, and to the proper troubles of his hard occupation, a pair of kite heels, no unusual accompaniment, be superadded. The demand on thy humanity will surely rise to a tester. This is the composition, the groundwork of which I have understood to be the sweet wood, cut sassafras, this wood boiled down to a kind of tea and tempered with the infusion of milk and sugar, hath to some taste a delicacy beyond the China luxury, China tea. I know not how thy palate may relish it. For myself, with every deference to the judicious Mr. Reed, who hath time out of mind kept open a shop, you remember, the only one he havers in London, for the vending of this wholesome and pleasant beverage, on the south side of the Fleet Street, as thou approachest Bridge Street. Yes, the only Salopian house. I have never yet adventured to dip my own particular lip in a basin of his commended ingredients. A cautious premonition to the olfactories constantly whispering to me that my stomach must infallibly, with all due courtesy, decline it. Yet I have seen palates, otherwise not uninstructed in dialectical elegances, sup it up with avidity. So we have, I know not by what particular conformations of the way we have seen this. But I have always found that this composition is surprisingly gratifying to the palate of a young chimney sweeper, whether the oily particles, sassafras, is slightly oleaginous, do accentuate and soften the fuliginous consecration which are sometimes found in dissections, to adhere to the roof of the mouth in these unfledged practitioners, or whether nature sensible that she had mingled too much of bitter wood in the lot of these raw victims, caused to grow out of the earth her sassafras for a sweet lenitive. But so it is that no possible taste or odor to the senses of a young chimney sweeper can convey a delicate excitement comparable to this mixture. Being penniless, they will yet hang their black heads over the ascending steam to gratify one's sense, if possible, seemingly no less pleased than those domestic animals, cats, when they purr over a newfound sprig of valerian. There is something more in these sympathies than philosophy can indicate. Now, albeit Mr. Reed can boast, Mr. Reed, his friend, can boasteth, not without reason, that his is the only Salopian house. Yet be it known to thee, you readers are listening, yes, if thou art one who keepest what are called good hours, thou art happily ignorant of the fact he hath a race of industrious imitators, who from stalls and under open sky dispense the same savory mess to humbler customers at that dead time of the dawn, when, as extremes meet, the rake reeling home from his midnight cups, and the hard-handed artisan leaving his bed to resume the premature labors of the day, jostle not unfrequently to the manifest disconcerting of the former for the honors of the pavement. It is the time when, in summer, between the expired and not yet relumined kitchen fires, the kennels of our fair metropolis give forth the least satisfactory odors. The rake who wisheth to dissipate his overnight vapors in more grateful coffee curses the ungenial fume as he passeth. But the artisan stops to taste the blesses the fragrant breakfast. This is Salop, the precocious herb woman's darling, the delight of the early gardener, who transports okay, one page is locked. So I continue. I just skip that portion. I am by theory obturate. So let us stop here. Okay, I will be talking about this essay again in my next class. So up to this, what we have seen and learned. Yes, your observations, please, on the prose style that has been employed in this essay. So we return back to the opening section. What type of prose style? Yes, this is a discussion time. So I was reading a portion of the text. Yes, any kind of observation? So let us enlist the prose style. So it is.
Sir, personal experiences, sir. He's sharing personal experiences.
Okay. So first point that you have identified is the personal experience that has been expressed in the essay. Okay, we note this one. So is the personality also present in this personal essay? The personality of the writer?
Yes, sir. He is using I.
Okay, the first person narration is there. So the narrative that has been
Yes,
used.
sir.
Could you see the person who is narrating the story in presence of the narrated story? Do you find the presence of the narrator in the environment, in the situation, incident of the narrated story? Is the narrator the first-hand eyewitness to what is happening in the narration? Yes? Is there any kind of familiarity that the writer is able to produce among the readers? Is the writer able to instill confidence among the readers that whatever he is narrating is true to fact? These are the questions that we raise. So when we think of this narratorial aspect of the essay, we find that essay is a kind of diegetic, or diegesis means narration, one kind of diegetic activity, narrative activity that has homodiegetic narrator, a person who is present in the narration as a eyewitness, as an eyewitness, as a person who is recounting personal experience. Therefore, this personal experience is filtered through the personality of the author and communicated to the readers with a sense of familiarity. Okay. So this question is also related to the amount of informality involved, in the depiction. So there is a certain amount of informality. The audience is absent. Okay, anonymous audience is being addressed, but there is a certain amount of informality, and therefore when the narrator, the addresser, is continually involving the addressee in the process of narration, we find that the narrative becomes a kind of expression of his or her own experience.
Sir, the address is not the audience.
Yeah, address is the audience, yes. The addresser is the narrator. Narrator here in this case is also the writer, because of the use of the personal pronoun I said that the diegetic or the narrative mode that is used has some kind of familiarity. This I, first person narrator, is also a participant or an eyewitness to what he is narrating. And therefore the anonymous addressee or the audience who is listening to the story or reading the story has a kind of bonding with the narrator oblique author and accepts everything what the narrator or the author is revealing. It not only reveals the personality of the writer, but also presents the subject through the filtered memory of the author or narrator. So there is an amount of informal communication, not formal communication, a kind of informal communication between the addresser and the addressee. This maximizes the potentiality of communication. So I said homodiegetic narrator is a person who is present in the narrative as an eyewitness and narrates that to the addressee. Here in this particular essay, we also find that this homodiegetic narrator becomes an autodiegetic narrator because of his participation in the events and situation that the person is describing. See how this formal way of participating in the event and situation. He says that when I was a small boy, I looked at this small chimney sweeper and we were of the same size, but this chimney sweeper was full of dust and soot and he looked like a blackened individual, an imp, okay, who could easily pass through the tunnels. And the entire spectacle was a spectacle of wonder for me. So childlike wonder was there in the representation. So we have the presence of both the witness, eyewitness, as well as the subject, the chimney sweeper, in this narration. So this is one aspect of romantic essays. So romantic essay is not an escape from emotion, not an escape from the situation or event. There is no kind of objectivity, safe distance from the subject. Rather, we have a more expression of the personality, presence, subjectivity, communication between the subject matter and the writer or narrator the subject matter and the audience, the author and the audience, the addresser and the audience. Now the language. See, in the first stanza itself, we have a long sentence. Look at the size of the sentence, one paragraph, one sentence. So modern day intellectuals might find that this is not possible. And this is possible because of the orality of the narration. We did not find any kind of difficulty in understanding. If we just perform the lines or read the lines, keeping in mind the punctuation marks that are used in this particular stanza, particular paragraph, we find that even with the help of such complex sentence pattern, we can easily understand the meaning because of the informality that is there. Can you get the meaning? So this is a unique prose style where we have complex sentence structure to communicate simple subject matter in an interesting manner with a certain amount of informality and orality. So it is like an oral performance. I said earlier that periodical essays developed as an informal representation, a kind of informal representation to an audience. And the circulating library provided the materials, and these materials were often read in a communal manner. So this communal readership was there during that period. As because the expensive reading material was not available to all, usually an elderly person or a well-read person used to narrate this, especially in the winter. So in the winter, they had no option but to stay indoors. So there is this fire that is there, warming the house, and a senior person of the house reading the stories to the young listeners. So that language of informality, the communication becomes more oral, performative. That type of prose style has been used in the essays of Lamb. So this is another characteristic feature of Lamb's prose style. Now another feature you find that things are said, okay, but information is very limited. Okay, so this is called Charles Lamb's famous prose style of iteration. So one thing is said again and again and again. Okay, in different phrasing, in different ways. So you just go around the mulberry bush, keep on rounding the mulberry bush again and again. And the thing that you know, come to know through this reading of the text is the same thing. So he keeps on taking the readers around the subject, phrasing, rephrasing, saying the same thing again and again, and with the help of reiteration or repetition, the interest is grown among the readers. This is another feature of Charles Lamb's essays. So this feature is called iteration, reiteration, or simply the way of saying one thing again and again in roundabout, periphrastic manner through circumlocution, ghuriye bola, okay, through circumlocution, or saying the same thing in a very roundabout manner in a poetical way. So we have also in Lamb's prose style a certain amount of informal poetry, a certain amount of orality and poetry. Both are combined together because like the ballad form is an oral form. So like the ballad form, this personal essays of Charles Lamb contains this kind of orality as well as poetry. Subject matter that is drawn from common life, common situation. Here the subject is the chimney sweeper, and that chimney sweeper is narrated, described in such a way that we have a clear-cut picture of that person, and that too in the most poetic form. The language therefore comes very close to poetry. I said romantic poetry came closer to the language of prose, as William Wordsworth himself said that my intention is to write in language really used by men. Coleridge objected to that, yes. He said that there is an essential difference between the language of poetry and language of prose. When prose is well written, it becomes poetry. And here we have an example that language is so well written that it comes very close to poetry. The language is poetic. Even with the complex sentence, complex patterning, the language is not having that inane phraseology, the gaudiness, the abundance of rhetorical uses that we find in the neoclassical prose. So the sixth element of Lamb's prose style is the use of dramaticity. Did you notice drama, elements of drama? So romantic period was, it is said, was not suitable for the development of drama as a form, because in most of the plays that were composed during the period, there was an abundance of poetry. Of course, there were great writers who were writing plays for the stage, and some of these plays were, of course, successful. Plays of Lord Byron, Shelley also wrote Prometheus Unbound. So they were plays written by the romantic writers, but these plays were not very popular on the stage because of their romantic elements, because of the abundance of poetry. The romantic plays, romantic drama became very close to the classical plays of Greece. In case of romantic essays, we have element of dramatic theatricality, and because of this theatricality, this type of essays became very popular. Even in the fictional forms, even in forms like novel, we have this kind of dramaticity. So when we read the novels of Charles Dickens was a Victorian writer. When we read the novels of Charles Dickens, we find that there is enough scope of drama in Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens also contributed a lot of plays for the stage, but his plays failed on the stage because of its prosaic nature, because of its in-depth, novelistic, descriptive prose, while his novel succeeded because of the dramatic element. And the taste of the reader and the performance of the text, the periodical publication of his novels, was almost similar to that of the essays. Charles Lamb is using that potentiality of this conversational, oral, prose form to communicate to the readers. So there is tremendous amount of theatricality in the works. See the sentence construction of this line. I have a kindly yearning towards these dim specks, poor blots, innocent blackness. Okay, so the punctuation, so dash, 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 multiple punctuation mark. So phrases, incomplete, fragmentary in nature. But we the readers, listeners, we can easily interpret what the writer is trying to communicate. Another feature of Charles Lamb's prose style is the use of reverie as a style. Okay, recollection and reverie as a style. Wordsworth, you remember, defined romantic poetry as a spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling that takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility. We can simply apply the same definition to Charles Lamb's prose style. So here again we have the spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling, but that definitely takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility. Look at this line. When I was a child, once upon a time, when I was a child, what a mysterious pleasure it was to witness their operation. To see a chit, a person no bigger than your own self, enter, one knew not what by what process, into that fosses Averni, tunnels of inferno, to pursue him in imagination. So this person went sounding through the streets, so many dark, stifling caverns, through the tunnels, horrid shades, so shadowy, dreamlike, to shudder with the idea. So I used to think when I was a child, now surely he must be lost forever. And then I get revived when I hear the sound of this feeble shout discovered by daylight. Oh, fullness of delight. So he's running out of doors to come just in time to see sable phenomena emerge in safety. See how dramatic is the entire representation. And because of this dramaticity, we have the development of new type of prose style. So let us summarize what we have learned today. We have learned that, yes, can you summarize one by one? I stop presenting the essay. Let us summarize what we have learned today.
Sir, first about the romantic essay.
The features of romantic essays, the types of romantic essays that developed during that period. Then we came to the understanding of, yes, periodical essays. We had a small extract from
Yes, sir.
Charles Lamb's In Praise of Chimney Sweepers that has been taken from the collection called Essays of Elia. And on reading the text, we understood, we identified certain features of romantic essay. So what is your task? Your task is to recall whatever discussion was made and then summarize with reference to the discussion, the development of, the rise and development of romantic essay. This is the first topic. The second topic will be Charles Lamb as an essayist and his prose style. So these are the three topics that we have tried to cover. The remaining part of the essay, would you like to read yourself, or shall we read the essay again? Or would you like to make some presentations on Charles Lamb's essays as we practiced earlier? Yes? Any suggestion? Most of you have gone to sleep. Yes?
Sir, the three topics again, can we summarize? Rise and development of romantic essay,
Very good.
Charles Lamb as a romantic essayist, Charles Lamb's prose style.
Excellent. These are the three topics. So two topics I have not discussed. Charles Lamb as an essayist and the prose style. I have only introduced these two topics, while the first topic I have discussed in detail. So every year 2 or 3 questions come in the NET examination from this area, romantic essayist. So that is your task. So prepare some notes regarding the rise and development of romantic essays. I was asking, would you like to make a presentation next day? Or just discussion? Okay, next day we will discuss, continue the discussion. Next part of the essay we will discuss. Yes, any other question, observation do you have? Yes, any other?
Not at this moment. Regarding the syllabus,
Sir,
not at this
you
moment.
have said that repetition or iteration, or what was the word?
Yeah, that is a figurative device.
Sir, spelling.
iteration, iteration. So it is a figurative device. Okay, that involves circumlocution, periphrasis, even Johnsonese. Okay, different types of literary devices are combined together, where a single story is told in so many ways. A single event, incident, even character is described in so many roundabout ways to make the subject very interesting. It is a kind of composition that involves repetition. Okay, saying the same thing again and again in different phrases, in different ways. So this is a characteristic style that we find in the works of Charles Lamb. Remember in Rosalind, we found some characteristic features. Yeah, euphemism was one aspect of the prose style. You remember that, no? Lodge prose style. So similarly, in Charles Lamb prose style, we have this iteration as a device. So in order to make the subject more interesting, he will be talking and saying the same thing again and again in a roundabout manner. Yes, any other question? Can I conclude now?
Okay, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much for your attendance. So when shall we meet again?
So you can stop the recording and we shall discuss freely.
Okay, thank you very much. I stop recording now. Thank you.